नमो तस् भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स। नमो तस् भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स। नमो तस् भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स. Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Hey, so today we are going to be looking at the remaining part of the book number 7, and we have come to the end of the book 7 with this class, and we have finished about 4 subsections, and today we will be covering the subsection 5, 6, 7, and in the end 8. So as we know that Buddha has attained to Mahaparinirvana under the true Sala trees, and Buddha had already, left the world. And this is, as I said in the last class, that Baba Ambedkar quoted this Pali text, which I'm going to begin to read again to set a context for today's class. So the Pali verse goes like this: Diva tapati adiccho ratina abhati chandrima sannadho khatiyo tapati jhai tapati brahmano atha sabbena ahoratang buddho tapati tejasa. Means the Buddha shine during the day and the night. So the light of the Buddha is always there. The light of enlightenment is always there. That's what Baba Ambedkar is saying here. And in the verse number 32, he is saying that the Buddha was beyond the question, the light of the world. And I think this word we have seen, that Buddha was the light of the world, and he brought a new light in the world. And without, one can imagine the world without the Buddha. And we can see that the Buddha, the emergence of the Buddha in the world was a historical development for the mankind. It was one of the turning points in the history of the mankind. So let's go further, and the subsection 5 is titled as The Lament of Mallas and the Joy of a Bhikshu. So two contradictory things, that the Mallas are reciting, are rejoicing, and the Mallas are sad, and one Bhikshu is rejoicing. So, it's a contradictory title. We are going to look at what it is all about. So the Buddha said to Ananda that, he should go to the Mallas because he was in their territory, and inform the Mallas that the Buddha is going to attend to Mahaparinirvana in their territory. And accordingly, Ananda went and informed the Mallas of the event. And when they heard of this, the Mallas, their wives, their young men and maidens were grieved and sad and afflicted at heart. Some of them wept, disheveling their hair, and stretched forth their arms and fell prostrate on the ground. So this scene, you can see it in the Buddhist sculptures, and in several places where, at the time of the Mahaparinirvana of the Buddha, how different people reacted. So some of them wept, some of them, had their hair disheveled, and they stretched their arms forth, and they fell prostrate on the ground. So, the different reactions of the different people to the news that the Buddha has left the world. Then the Mallas with their young men and maiden and their wives went to the Sala Guru in the Upavana to have the last look of the Blessed One. So all of the Mallas went to where the Buddha's last remains were kept, and they went there, and Venerable Ananda then thought, if I allow the Mallas of Kushinara one by one, it will take a long time for them to pay homage to the dead body of the Blessed One. So he decided to arrange them in groups, family by family. Each family then bowed humbly at the feet of the Blessed One and parted. So you see, there were a lot of people to pay their homage to the Buddha, and Ananda thought wisely, if he allowed them to come one by one, it will take a long time. So he allowed them to come in the families and in the groups. And now at that time, the Venerable Mahakassapa was journeying along the high road from Pava to Kushinara with a great company of the brethren. So Mahakashyapa, another great bhikshus and the disciples of the Buddha, was journeying from Pava to, he was on the way. And just at the time, a certain naked ascetic was coming along the high road to Pava, and the Venerable Mahakashyapa saw the naked ascetic coming in the distance. And when he had seen him, he said to the naked ascetic, "O friend, surely thou knowest our master." And the ascetic replied, "Yes, friend, I know him. This day, the Samana Gautama has been dead a week." So the news, that time, the news was not passing fast as it does today. And it took time, at a time of a week, for Mahakashyapa to grapple with this loss of his master. So, he came to know about the Mahaparinirvana of the Buddha while he was on his way to Kushinara from Pava. So immediately on hearing the news, the brethren were overcome with great grief and started weeping. So some of them must have been very close to the Buddha. Some of them were the very close friends of the Buddha in the company of Mahakashyapa and his disciples. So, they started crying, they started weeping. So now at that time, a brother named Subhadra, who had been received into the Sangha in his old age, was seated in their company. So, as the tradition goes, Subhadra was sitting there in the company of this entourage of Mahakashyapa. And this Subhadra addressed the brethren and said, "Enough, brethren, weep not, neither lament. We are well rid of the great Samana. We used to be annoyed by being told, 'This beseems you, this beseems you not.' But now we shall be able to do whatever we like. And what we do not like, that we shall not have to do. Isn't it good? He is dead. Why weep? Why lament? It's a matter of joy. So great and harsh a disciplinarian the Blessed One was." So this is what the Subhadra said. And hearing this, according to the canonical literature, hearing this, Kashyapa thought that now there will be trouble in the Sangha, and he assembled the first Dhamma Sangiti. So he said, the tradition goes that this is what prompted Mahakashyapa to go for the Sangiti. But there are a lot of scholarly debates about Sangiti, because there is already a sutra in Pali called the Sangiti Sutra. And when the Buddha was alive, it is said that it was Sariputra who codified, arranged the Buddha's teaching in the manner that is available to us today. So, there are a lot of things historically, but, this episode of Subhadra points out to the fact that there were some people who were very wary of the disciplines which the Buddha imposed on his orders, so that, they can progress. So, what Baba Ambedkar brings to us from this discussion here is, so great and harsh a disciplinarian the Blessed One was. So now let's go to the last rites. Then the Mallas of Kushinara said to the Venerable Ananda, "What should be done with the remains of the Tathagata?" What I'm doing, I'm reading it because it's episodic now. Because, whenever there is any teaching point comes, I will elaborate. Till that time, I'm going to browse through the text, so that if there are any things to be explained, I will go to that. So then the Mallas of Kushinara said to the Venerable Ananda, "What should be done with the remains of the Tathagata? As men treat the remains of a king of kings, so should you treat the remains of the Tathagata," replied Ananda. "And how do they treat the remains of a king of kings?" Ananda told him, "They wrap the body of a king of kings in a new cloth. When that is done, they wrap it in cotton wood. When that is done, they wrap it in a new cloth, and so on till they have wrapped the body in 500 successive layers of both kinds. When they place the body in an oil vessel of iron and cover that close up with another oil vessel of iron, then they build a funeral pile of all kinds. This is the way in which they treat the remains of a king of kings." So be it, said the Mallas. Then the Mallas of Kushinara said, it's much too late to burn the body of the Blessed One today. Let's now perform the cremation tomorrow. And the Mallas of Kushinara gave orders to their attendants and saying, making preparations for the funeral of the Tathagata and gather perfumes and garlands and the musicians of Kushinara. You see the Mahaparinirvan, as Baba Ambedkar had said, written in another of his writings, that in Buddhism there is a celebration of death. So he gives the example of Burma as to how the death is celebrated there, with all ceremonies and all music and all. So here is the same thing, same tradition is here. The perfumes were ordered, the musicians of Kushinara were ordered to come. But in paying honor, reverence, respect, and homage to the remains of the Tathagata with dancing and hymns and music and with garlands and perfumes, and in making canopies of their garments and preparing decoration wreath to hand thereon, they passed the second day too, and then the third day, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth day also went by. Then on the seventh day, the Mallas of Kushinara thought, let's carry the body of the Blessed One and let's perform the cremation ceremony. And thereupon 8 chieftains among the Mallas bathed their heads and clad themselves in new garments with the intention of acting as pallbearers carrying the body of the Blessed One. They carried the dead body to the shrine of the Mallas called Makutabandhana to the east of the city, and there they laid down the body of the Blessed One and set fire to it. After some time, the mortal remains of the Blessed One were reduced to ashes. See, this is what the Buddha, what was done to the body of the Buddha. And I don't know whether this is a paid subscription, but just hold on for a minute. Okay, we'll carry on till it goes. I didn't know that the subscription has ended. So after some time, the mortal remains of the Blessed One were reduced to ashes. After the body of the Blessed One had been consumed by the fire, the Mallas of Kushinara collected the ashes and the bones of the Blessed One and placed them in their council hall with a lattice work of spear and with a rampart of bows, and guarded them against anybody stealing them or any part of them. So you see, the body of the remains of the Buddha were very precious. As we know that the whole Buddhist history is revolving around the relics of the Buddha, and the relics of the Buddha were so precious that they were guarded with armed guards. And for 7 days, the Mallas paid honor and reverence and respect and homage to them with dance and song and music and with garlands and perfumes. You see, this was a tradition of respecting the remains of the Buddha. Now the king of Magadha, Ajashatru, heard the news that the Blessed One had died at Kushinara. He therefore sent a messenger to the Mallas with a request for a portion of the relics of the Blessed One. Similarly, messengers came from the Lichavis of Vaishali, from the Shakyans of Kapilvastu, from the Bulis of Atakappa, from the Koliyas of Ramagama, and from the Mallas of Pava. So, all the people wanted, the news came to take the portion of the relics of the Buddha. Among the claimants for ashes, there was also Brahmin of Vethadipa. When they heard these claims, the Mallas of Kushinara said, the Blessed One died in our village. We will not give away any part of the remains of the Blessed One. They belong to us. You see, the whole, the relics of the Buddha became a kind of, some kind of sign of a power, and the Mallas didn't want to depart with their precious belonging. Seeing that the situation was a tense one, a Brahmin by name Drona intervened and said, here, Reverend sirs, one single word from me. Said Drona, forbearance was our Buddha to teach. Unseemly is it that over the division of the remains of him who was the best of the beings, strife should arise and wounds and war. Let's all, sirs, with one accord unite in friendly harmony to make 8 portions. So that's what his suggestion. Widespread, let stupas arise in every land that the enlightened one from all parts be reverenced. The Mallas of Kushinara agreed and said, do thou then, O Brahmin, thyself divide the remain equally into 8 parts with the fair division. Be it so, sir, said Drona in assent. And he divided the remains of the Blessed One equally into 8 parts. After making the division, Drona said to them, give me, sirs, this vessel, I will set up over it a stupa. And they agreed to give the vessel to him, and the ashes of the Blessed One were shared, and the quarrel was settled peacefully and amicably. So that's what happened to the relics of the Buddha. As we have seen from this episode, it was so precious, and we know in the history now that so many big stupas were constructed. 8 stupas were constructed. Ashoka then digged them up and built 84,000 stupas. So 8, loyalty to the Buddha. Shravasti was the occasion of these events. Now on that occasion, a number of monks were busied with making a robe for the Exalted One with this idea: when the robe is finished in 3 months' time, the Exalted One will go forth on his rounds. Now at that time, Isidatta and Purana, the chamberlains, were staying at Sadhuka on some business or other. Then they heard the news. They say that a number of monks are busied with making a robe for the Exalted One with this idea: when the robe is finished in 3 months' time, the Exalted One will go forth upon his rounds. So Isidatta and Purana, the chamberlains, stationed a man on the high road, thus instructing him, now, good fellow, as soon as you see that Exalted One, that Arhant, that perfectly enlightened one coming along, do you come and inform us. So after standing 2 or 3 days, that man saw the Exalted One coming along while at some distance off, and he went to inform the chamberlain Isidatta and Purana, saying, here comes my lord, the Exalted One, that Arhant, that perfectly enlightened one. Now is the time for you to do what you want. So Isidatta and Purana, the chamberlains, went towards the Exalted One, and on coming to him, saluted him and followed behind the Exalted One step for step. Then the Exalted One turned aside from the high road and went to the foot of a certain tree, and there sat down on a seat made ready. And Isidatta and Purana, the chamberlains, saluting the Exalted One, also sat down at one side as they thus sat. They said to the Exalted One, Lord, when we heard of the Exalted One, that he would go forth on his rounds among the Kosalans at that time, we were disappointed and depressed as the thought the Exalted One will be far from us. And when, Lord, we learned the Exalted One was starting out from Shravasti on his round among the Kosalans again, we were disappointed and depressed at the thought the Exalted One will be far from us. Again, Lord, when we learned that the Exalted One would leave the Kosalans and go on his rounds among the Mallas, that he was actually doing so, we were disappointed and depressed. On hearing that the Exalted One would leave the Mallas and go on his rounds among the Vajjis, and that he was actually doing so, that he would leave the Vajji for Kasi, that he was doing so, that he would leave the folk of Kasi and go on his rounds in Magadha, that he was actually doing so. Again, we were disappointed and depressed. But Lord, when we heard that the Exalted One would leave the Magdas for Kasi and was doing so, then we were delighted and elated at the thought the Exalted One will be quite near us. You see, this is how the people loved the Buddha. They wanted to be near the Buddha. They wanted the Buddha to be near to them. And when we heard that he was actually going his rounds in Kasi among the Magadas, we were likewise delighted and elated. They continued to trace the master steps from Kasi to Vajji, from Vajji to Mallas, from Mallas to the Kosalans in like terms. But Lord, when we heard that the Exalted One would be going on his rounds from the Kosalans to Shravasti, we were delighted and elated at the thought. Now the Exalted One will be quite near us. Then when we heard the Exalted One is staying at Shravasti, at Jeta's Grove, in Anathpindaka's park, then Lord, boundless was our delight and boundless our elation at the thought the Exalted One is near us. So we finished the book number 7 here, but I'm going to gloss over some of the things here, particularly the loyalty of the people to the Buddha. And as we have seen from this last subpart, that the people were so loyal to the Buddha, they loved the Buddha so much. And And we in the Buddhist tradition, this loyalty, the love for the Buddha was translated into Shraddha. And the Shraddha in the Buddha is very important, because the word Shraddha has a connotation of placing our heart on something which is higher than us, not in terms of a god, not in terms of some deities, but some kind of an ideal which we aspire. And to place one's heart on such an ideal is Shraddha. And Shraddha has a very deep connotation of metta. So when we extend our metta to the blessed people like the Buddha, like Arhanta, the metta turns into Shraddha. So you see, the loyalty to the Buddha has been a very important tradition that has continued throughout the ages. At the time of the Buddha, the people used to come and pay their homage to the Buddha by offering him perfume, garlands, and so on and so forth. So, I don't know what happened to my subscription, but I think I need to upgrade, and we have less than a minute. So we can stop here for today, and I will arrange the upgraded version in the next class. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.